Oh. Is the only way you know. Dropping to 50. That's how you know. Ooh, sounds nice. know you were lonely and that's why you did it anyway. She had gone down to the local pub. She heard there were some nice boys down there. She might go down for a drink. She knew she'd stick real close by the bar in the corner. She knew he was a good man. She wasn't looking for company with him, but he was a good man. Grandfather in the corner. Oh. It was that night she went to leave the pub. Was a blind bard sitting outside. No, there's no back door, so you gotta go out the front door. Say hey. Came to the end of the night, there was no man she wanted to be. She'd had a few drinks, but she was about herself to be. Came to leave, and we go. Drop a few coins on the bar, and out she went. Was the blind bard and three men with bad looks in their eyes. She said, might I hear a song? Say it. May I stay and walk a while with you, blind bard, on the trail? Folks so remedy. Oh, his grandfather in disguise, he was watching out for his ancient granddaughter. Round about that time, the old man, look at him, look at them, he knew what they wanted. Hey, old man, we're taking her with us, he said, but there ain't no way, 'cause that's my granddaughter said. At that, the three men turned to toads, vanished to dust. The golden toad appeared and booked out 3 coins. And the men were no more. They all made a deal, you know, to crossroads. Say yeah. Run to the woodland, run to the woodland, run to the woodland, run to the woodland. There dwelled her true love. The dark Druid had put a spell on her not to see. True love. sea. Come to circle around, coming for a fire by you. Say oh. I think it was the Elf Ranger, and he was waiting in the woodland, instrument in hand. I know, sir, but you want to play anyway on the wind. Say, easy on the wave, no, I always say. Stand around the fire, if you came to circle round, say it. Freedom on the land. She only asked him one question. Are you a folk soul? And if so, can I stay here with you? They're all round about me in the town. You know how they bring the torches all around. Wise women come to town. Hold up, you know. Grandmother Volvo, she does go. Ancient Druidess upon the way, I know. It's not just a story, but you know, it's the inspiration for me. Hey. Easy on the wind, you know, storm's coming my way. Cause I am frog in the throat, it's rough down here. Ask me, why do you sing all the time for free? Cause I feel it deep down, deep down, deep down. Easy on the way. Feel the elevation, my folks soul. I turned to stone in my heart, you see. Oh, you know there'd be an ember deep down. Turn the stone to lava in my heart and soul, transformed into essence of folk soul. Flaming well, that's what I meant anyway. Heart's flame burning on, intuition, intention, like willpower, manifestation, resonation. Resonant note on the frequency, Where you going, I know. woodland, I know. Freedom on the way, you know. Sitting far, so far away, didn't even know you'd see me at all. Alright, now I'm going to be sneaky and read one chapter. Okay. This is called Lamp. Chapter 9, Deception by Kenneth. Hold on just a second. By Kenneth C. Flint, The Dark Druid. Page 92, Chapter 9, Deception. I'm going to sit up and chill. It was hardcore. It was. I feel while I play, so I'm an empath by nature, and it's how I learn. Excuse me, just cleaning my lips. That way you don't get gummy mouth, right? Okay. Finn's sword slashed the mailed warrior from his path. He winnowed the attacking host like a fall wind sweeping through dry leaves, thickly covering the ground. There was no finesse in him now, no heroic posturing, no champion-like challenges to single combat. Only a grim determination to slash his way ahead as swiftly as his fighting skills could take him. The invading Lochlanders reeled backward toward the sea under the fierce onslaught. Finn led the Fionn warriors in pressing them, forcing them to retreat until their feet were trampling in the surf and their blood was tinging the white foam to rose. Wow. Relentlessly, the young captains went on slaughtering with great strokes of the Mac and Luine slamming away thrusts and counterstrokes with the impenetrable storm shield that seemed to thunder its defiance. The lockliners began to panic, realizing they were trapped, overwhelmed by the determined Irish fighting men whose numbers were less than half of their own. In a growing rout, they began to leave the fight, splashing out to clamber into their boats. Cowlight, fighting close beside Finn, shouted to his comrade, "Finn, they're running! They're beaten! He can make a truce!" Finn said, "No!" savagely, a hard cut neatly beheading yet another foe. Oh shit. No, no, no truce with them. We kill them, destroy them all. Wow. Let none escape, chase them into the sea. But why? Cowlight asked in shock. Why waste good men? You've not done that before. I said press on, Finn cried, turning to face Cowlight. His sword ran with hot blood that reddened his arm to its elbow and was splattered across all his body. His face glowed and his eye blazed with battle light. Kill them, Cowlight. We must finish them. Finish them. His gaze swept around over the melee, and then he pointed with his sword. There is their chieftain, he proclaimed exultantly. That's the one I must have. He was indicating the broadly built warrior with flowing beard and elaborately horned helmet, who now stood before the dragon-headed prow of a long boat and tried to muster his dissolving force. Finn at once dove into the press of the struggling men and began to cleave a bloody path for himself through the hapless lockliners, straight for the chief. The individual was in desperate straits. His men to keep on the fight were useless. The air of cruel arrogance that had been on him when his host had crushed the village was gone, replaced by an expression of both fearful and amazed as he watched his men so easily be overcome. Finn slashed through a last intervening barrier of men and leaped before the startled chief. You are a fool to come to Ireland, Finn snarled. The chieftain was older and heavier than the fair warrior who now confronted him so challengingly. But he was a veteran fighting man. Though surprised by the suddenness of Finn's appearance, he reacted with speed, striking out with a massive double-bladed axe. But now twice his speed would have been enough to counter Finn this day. The young captain easily ducked away from the blow and then charged in. Their battle was hard, brief, and one-sided. Finn beat down the chieftain's guard with a few massive strokes, smashed away his shield, hacked through the thick haft of his war axe. Wow. And sent the man staggering back with a sweeping blow of the storm shield. The chieftain dropped heavily to his knees. A hopelessness overspread his face as he looked up to the young captain standing over him, glaring down so sternly. My warriors are beaten, he said in a broken voice. We are lost. We will yield to you. We will pay whatever tribute you ask if you will let those remaining live. I will not, Finn said without pity. Wow. I have no more patience. There will be no more invasions of Ireland. Wow. The world will know that To do it will mean death. Ooh. With that, he stepped forward, making a sharp thrust with the Macanluin that slammed through the chieftain's chest and pierced his heart. Wow. The man grunted once, his eyes registering his surprise. Finn yanked back on the sword, pulling it free. The lifeblood gushed from the wound, and the chieftain toppled over, burying his face in the trampled sand, already dead. The rest of his once proud force was finished as well. Many fleeing men were cut down in the surf, or as they scrambled for the boats. A handful escaped, leaving hundreds of their fellows strewn upon the crimson-stained beach. Cowlight, witnessing this massacre and Finn's own ruthless act, moved to his side to speak in protest. "Why are you doing this?" he said angrily. "Why are you doing this? Where is your justice, Finn? Justice!" Finn said irritably, swinging his bloody sword sharply sideways in a gesture that seemed to sweep the concept contemptuously away. There will be no more of that. No. I've made my last mistake in the name of justice. No one dares invade my lands. My land will live to come again. They'll learn. They'll all learn. I will have peace. Nothing will happen to make me leave Almhuin again. He turned to his friend, fixing him with a commanding gaze. Let all men know what making war in Ireland will bring. He pointed to the dead chieftain. His head I want to show as a trophy and example to the lords of Ireland. Have the heads of the rest piled in a great cairn. Here, as a warning to the other raiders, the bodies can be sent to their homes in their own boats. He turned away from a dumbfounded cowlight and stared off toward the west, his tone at once softening with yearning. Then we start home, he said, as if to himself. Home to Sob. There was a look of yearning on the face of Sob also as she stood at the rail of the sunroom, looking out across the country toward the east. The day was overcast with a softening haze of mistiness that gave a gauze-like texture to the scene and made the meadows somewhat a more intense green beneath the gray white against the dampness. Sob's head was covered by a knitted shawl. Below, Canoe de Royal stepped from the doorway of the main hall and looked up toward her. One of the old warriors serving as a guard beside the door followed his gaze, then shook his head in a pitying way. That poor lass, he said. It's every day now, since himself went away, that she's been up there. Sunshine or driving rain, looking out after him. Oh well, you can understand her doing that, the harper replied. Finn is nearly all her life now. There's little for her here with him gone, and only the sorry few of us to cheer her. I've done everything I can think of, but still the sorrow comes more upon her each day, like these clouds creeping upon the sun. Only Finn's return can bring the brightness back into that child's face. Well, he'll be coming back soon enough, I'm certain, the old warrior said. The bloody Morrigan herself couldn't keep Finn away. True enough, the little nut agreed. Then he shivered. Well, she can do as she likes, but I'm going back in. It's too chill for me. He looked at the warrior, who appeared quite cold and miserable himself, though stoically standing at his post. Wrapped tightly in the wet cloak, his damp graying hair plastered about his head. And why don't you come in as well? At least have a bit of hot broth to warm your bones. If you say it's all right, the man said with a grin, then it wouldn't take a club about my head to make me accept. Maybe a little game of feed shell as well. The little man suggested as he ushered the guard inside. There's no one else about who can play. How are you? With them gone, the yard was empty, save for the figure of the lonely girl upon her balcony. She continued to stand there, seemingly indifferent to the damp and cold, as she gazed intently out. For a time she saw nothing but the empty, mist-shrouded countryside. Nothing moved there except a few soggy birds fluttering like wet scraps of cloth in the wind. Their cries plaintive and distant in the muting heaviness of the air. And then within a little copse of trees just below the hill, there was movement. It caught her eye. She looked toward it. At first casually, then more intently, her eyes growing wide in disbelief. From the trees moved 3 figures. One was Finn Macumeo, while on the other hand trotted the faithful hounds Bron and Skilon. The surprise in her face changed to elation. She opened her mouth to cry out in joy, but the cry was cut off as yet another emotion swept over her, this time great alarm. For as the 3 reached the hill's base and started up the slope, she could see that Finn was moving haltingly, supporting his body on what looked to be a shattered spear's pole, and that there was a great scarlet streak of blood staining his tunic at one side. Finn was wounded, and very gravely, it appeared. In fact, as she watched, he staggered badly, dropped to one knee, and rolled down onto his back. The hounds moved up quickly on either side to nose at him in a manner of great concern. Sob gasped in fear for him. Without hesitation, she turned from the balcony, all but flying down the stairs to the lower level of the house and out its front door. She paused just outside, glancing desperately around the yard for help, but it seemed deserted still, not taking any precious time to seek someone. She instead ran across the yard to the unattended gates. Oh, you know who that is. With the strength clearly enhanced by the power of her need, the frail girl wrested the heavy locking bar aside and shoved the gate outward far enough to squeeze her slender body through. But her departure did not go unnoticed. Canoe de Royal and the old warrior, he holding a steaming mug of broth, stepped out into the hall's doorway, in time to catch just a fleeting glimpse of the gowned figure as it slipped through the crack. But that was not enough. The little nut stared in shock for an instant. Then he was running forward, shouting back over his shoulder to the warrior, "Get help! Quickly, man, and follow me!" He reached the gates and pushed his small body through the opening. Behind him, the warrior had begun raising the alarm. Below him, he could see a sob already far down the slope, and he took in a little tableau of the fallen man and the 2 hounds at the hill's base. He watched with growing horror as he reached this trio and dropped down beside the figure of Finn, lifting his head to cradle in her lap. "No, Sob," he screamed in desperate warning as he charged down toward her. "Get away from him! That can't be Finn." The cry reached her. She looked up to see the little man rushing down the slope. Bewildered, she dropped her gaze back to the face of the man she held. It was the scarred, blackened face of the dark Druid that now looked up at her, its mouth stretched wide in a cruel and gloating manner. She shrieked and jumped to her feet, dropping him back as if he were a white-hot iron, searing her flesh. She whirled about to flee from him, but where the two hounds had been, two bears now stood, blocking her other avenues of retreat. She wheeled back about to see the feared Dorsch had now arisen and was stalking toward her, arm extending what before had seemed a spear, but had now become his magic druid rod or staff. Its silver tip pointed toward her, threatening. She tried to back away, but her legs thudded against the shaggy side of one bear who had moved up close behind her. She tried to turn and leap past him, but she was too late. The druid moved swiftly in, striking forward with his rod. The tip touched her arm. From it streamed a silver light, more like a liquid as it poured across her, encasing, trapping her, holding her as if she'd been suddenly frozen in a cocoon of ice. Only one low moan of agony escaped her before her head dropped back, and she stood completely enveloped by the light. It grew brighter, shrouding her body in translucent glow. Then, as before, the shadowy form within the glow began to shift. It writhed and shrank, the erect form dropping down as if she were falling to her hands and knees. This time, the transformation came more quickly. It was only seconds before the glow was fading, leaving revealed the form of a trembling fawn. By now, Kenneth had reached the group. Fearlessly, the little man hurled himself upon the dark druid. Crying out in rage, he grappled with the larger man, tearing at his clothes, butting at him with his head. "You'll not take her," he shouted. "I'll kill you first." Fyodor's response to this was a cool one. He seemed more amused than disconcerted by the little man's attack. He shoved Kenneth away with one arm and swung his rod sideways with the other in a hard blow that smacked the harper sharply across his temple. It was knocked sideways and tumbling into the ground, stunned. Fear stepped over him, looking down at the still form with his sneer. "So you dare to interfere with me, little man," he said. He gave a sadistic laugh and extended the deadly rod. "Well, I'll show you what kind of horror I can make for those who do as you." The rod moved closer to the helpless Kenneth Royal. The silver tip hovered just above his face. A warning growl from one of the bears drew the dark druid's attention. He glanced round to see the animal pointing uphill with its muzzle. His gaze lifted to the fortress. A score of men brandishing swords, tools, and cooking utensils were pouring from the gates and charging down the slope. I might point out I'm wearing a chef's jacket. Yes, it was my old work jacket. I was a chef, of course. He looked down to the harper again. No time for you now. No time for you now, he said with regret, drawing back the rod. Then he looked to the bears brusquely, ordering, "We must be away. Direct our prize back into the trees. Hurry." The bears moved to flank the fawn and herd her toward the wood. She moved with great reluctance, casting despairing glances back toward the fortress and her would-be rescuers. But they were still some distance up the slope when the bears forced her into the shadow of the trees. They were closely followed by the dark Druid, who paused to cast a last triumphant leer toward the Fianna men before he too slipped away into the cloaking wood and vanished from their sight. Most of the men charged into the trees after him, looking around. But now there were no signs of the movement in the deep shadows or even any sounds. They split up, spreading quickly through the wood, searching the treetops and beating the underbrush. Meanwhile, the old warrior and another of their number were seeing a canoe royal. The little man recovered consciousness quickly, jumped up, looked frantically around him, and then turned to the two men. "Sob," he cried, "the Druid has her. Where are they?" "They went into the wood," the old warrior replied. "It's small, they can't escape." "Escape?" the harper said in despair. "He's a Druid of the She, you fool." And even as he spoke, some men were emerging from the trees, looking defeated and angry, shaking their heads in bewilderment. "It can't be," said the grim-faced steward called Rough Buzzing. "It can't be so, but we've searched all the wood. There's no sign of them. They've vanished as if they were never there." The host of Fianna, worn but proudly triumphant, sped swiftly toward the fortress of Amhuin. Following the pace set by their anxious captain, Finn looked eagerly ahead to the white-walled dun as they neared, eyes searching most hungrily to catch a first glimpse of his wife, but no familiar, slender figure showed. Upon the palisades or in the balcony of her Granian, there was only the form of a warrior who turned to shout to those inside the news of the host's return. When the Fianna reached the bottom of the slope, Finn's eagerness seemed to overcome him. He sprinted ahead of the others, the great hounds running at either hand, crossed the bridge, and pushed through the gates as they were being opened. He ran into the yard, noting that the inhabitants of the fortress were gathered about it as if to give greeting. He started toward the hall, smiling broadly, his eyes scanning the faces for that of Sob. But the faces held no answering smiles of joy. The people gathered were not cheering the returning men. Instead, their looks were solemn, their manners subdued, as if it were a morning time. Finn faltered to a stop in the middle of the yard, looking about him. "What's wrong?" he said. "What's happened?" Eyes were averted. People shuffled nervously or wrung their hands. Some women wept. An uncomfortable, ominous silence hung upon the yard. "Tell me what's wrong," Finn asked with growing alarm. He scanned the crowd again more anxiously. "Where is Sob?" "Finn," said the voice of the little nut, as he moved out from the hall and through the gathered folk to confront the young captain. "Canoe Royal, what's happening here?" Finn demanded in a desperate way. "Tell me what's happened. Where is Sob?" The harper's small face was drawn into a mask of agony. He hesitated, and then he spoke out in one terse, unpleasant phrase. "She's gone." The other Fionn warriors were moving in through the gates now, but Finn paid no attention. His stupefied gaze was on the little nut, blank, uncomprehending, as if his mind refused to accept what he must have suspected since the first, sensing the atmosphere in the yard. "Gone!" he repeated hollowly. Gone. This word of such terrible import seeming to have no meaning. What? What is it you're saying? I'm sorry, lad, the harper told him, his voice hoarse with sorrow. The Druid came. He took her. Finn took a step back as if he'd been struck a physical blow. The Fionn warriors, still moving into the yard, fell instantly silent and motionless with their own shock. Took her? Finn echoed again, still dazed. How? He came here in disguise as yourself, Kenneth Royal said in a weary, doleful tone, his body sagging, and with what looked to be brawn and skill. Before anyone could stop her, she ran out to him. The little man seemed close to tears. He had to force himself to go on with the awful tale. He struck her with his druid rod. He transformed her to a fawn and was away with her on the instant. There was nothing anyone could do. Finn listened, staring dumbfounded through all of this. But then he gave an animal growl of rage suddenly released. He rushed forward, face twisted, eyes flaring with madness. He seized the little man by the throat of his tunic and hauled him up off his feet, shaking him like a pup, shouting into his face, "You let her go! You were her protector, and you let her go." It was Druid trickery, Kenneth Royal managed to gasp out. Was being choked by Finn, his face growing crimson with suffocation. Cowlight ran to them, grabbing Finn's hands, trying to pull them from the harper's throat, but Finn hung on, fingers clamped with the strength of his mad rage. "Let him go, Finn," Cowlight pleaded. "You're killing him. Please let him go." This had an effect. Finn released his hold abruptly, and the little man dropped to his knees, coughing, pulling the tunic away from his bruised throat. "I will not kill you," Finn said through clenched teeth, glaring down on Kenneth Royal with hatred. "But I'll have no more ever to do with you." Oh shit, he's gonna banish him. I left in your care the thing most precious to me. I trusted you, my oldest friend, and you betrayed me. It's a curse I put on you for that, and it's no part of my life that you'll be from this day on. Bad move. He turned on his heel and stalked away back toward the fortress gates. The little nut watched him go silently, saying no more word in his defense. Then he sagged down in a crumpled pile, sobbing brokenly. But Cowlight followed after his comrade, who strode so purposely from the yard. "Finn, where are you going?" he said. Finn seemed not to hear, his fierce gaze fixed on the way ahead, striding on, forcing Cowlight to grab his arm and swing him round. "Where do you mean to go?" the dark warrior repeated. "To find her," Finn told him. "But where?" Cowlight asked. "You don't know where to seek her. She could be anywhere." "Then we'll search the whole of Ireland if we must." He shot back. "From the point of the Corca Duin to the mountains of Mourne." "Wait, Captain," said one of the clan chieftains, moving forward. "Our warriors are wearied from the campaign. They've had not rest or proper food for days, following you back here at the killing pace you set. And there are many wounded among them from the fight. You are Fionn men, not children, to be complaining of your aches and your empty bellies, Finn interrupted scathingly. What are you saying, Finn? Kenneth asked in shock. You can't ask these men to follow you now. At least give them a chance to rest for a few days and gather new supplies. What difference can it make? No, Finn nearly shouted in reply. There is no time. The thought of every moment more she spends in that monster's clutches is like another knife plunged in my heart. Ooh. Nothing can delay us. Until she is found, there can't be a moment's rest. He glared about him at the warriors. But I want the help of no man who has neither the stomach for it nor the loyalty to me. This raised looks of anger and mutterings of outrage amongst the assembled men. There is no call for you insulting us, Captain, the outspoken chieftain said indignantly. It's not a matter of loyalty to you. This has nothing to do with the welfare of Ireland, or with the Fionn laws or any of the clans. This is your own loss, and although we're sorry for it, it is only a woman. It's going to set him off. A woman? Finn echoed in rage, stepping toward the man in a threatening way. This is my life. Don't you see? Don't you understand? He looked around him at the grim faces. Don't any of you understand? There was no response. No, you don't, he spat out. You've no care for me at all. I ask your help and you deny me. You are treacherous hounds, and I'll have nothing to do with you. Slink back to your homes and whine and lick your wounds. I've no more need of the likes of you. With that, he wheeled about and stalked from the fortress yard, the hounds following. The warriors and chieftains of the other clans stared after him with expressions of hurt pride. The warriors of the Basine clan looked to Cowlight. What should we do? Asked Lughade in a dumbfounded way. We have to follow him, Cowlight said simply. He is our chieftain and our friend. It's only the sorrow on him that's making him this way. We'll go with him and help him with his hunting until the madness of it dies out. And so the Basine warriors, still carrying the same battered weapons of their last fight, still wearing the same torn and bloodied clothing of their hard campaign, weary and wounded, stoically turned again and marched out of the yard they had just entered. Behind them, still kneeling, still sobbing brokenly, they left the forlorn figure of the little harper, surrounded by the solemn, silent crowd. And the next chapter is the search. Chapter 10. Fall winds scored the countryside. Their crisp, chill dampness was tangy with the foretaste of the coming winter. The emerald meadows had faded to the dull gray-brown of a weathered thatch of roof, and the sky was a sodden cloak of rumpled gray wool. Only the trees added any note of warmth to the scene, with their leaves in the last death flame of autumn colors, but the winds had already stripped much of this glory, and were moaning in the naked branches like banshee keening for the coming death of a loved one. Across this desolate landscape moved a forlorn company of men, the Fionn warriors of the Basine clan, following a Finn Mac Cumhall who pressed on doggedly. They were beginning to look a somewhat worn lot now, a bit leaner and a bit threadbare, and the expressions of all, save the determined Finn, were uniformly glum. They crossed a ridge, reaching a place The land dropped off more sharply, providing a view of a broad, rolling countryside that stretched far away. It looked rather bleak, with only scattered patches of bare woods and no rising plume of smoke or cattle herd or circle of rath walls to give sign of any human habitation. Finn stopped there, his eyes moving slowly, searchingly over the scene ahead. His young face was set in a frown of concentration that had furrowed his brow, drawn down, curving lines about his tightly drawn mouth and crinkled the corners of his narrowed eyes. The dogs, as always, were close at either hand. But the others of the band, including Cowlight, had stopped some way behind as he examined the countryside. They huddled together in what seemed an intense discussion in muted tones, accompanied by much sharp gesticulation and by occasional glances toward the back of the young captain from one or another of the warriors. Cowlight was apparently the focus of this group, much of the talk being directed toward him, while his response was largely the shaking of his head, but finally, after giving one more troubled glance toward the lonely figure of his comrade, he sighed in an unhappy way and nodded. He moved away from the group and started toward Finn, then hesitated, looking back at the rest. They all stood watching him, their attitude tense and expectant, their expressions hopeful. Cowlight sighed heavily again and went on, stopping at Finn's side. Finn, he began in an uncharacteristically hesitant way. What? Finn asked tersely, not turning his gaze from its intense perusal of the distance. It's the other lads. They have been talking, Finn. And they wanted me to speak to you. What about? Finn said flatly, his attention still elsewhere. Well, it's how fast the weather's changing that they're thinking of. The fall is well on us now. Winter's coming. You can smell it's heavy in the air. I suppose you can, Finn agreed, appearing finally to register the words in the ominous tone of his comrade. Turned to regard him with a piercing look. Tell me your meaning, Cowlight. Say it out plain. All right, then, the Dark Warrior said more stoutly. They're thinking that it's time we gave this up. Gave it up, Finn said with shock. But we can't give it up. We've only begun the searching. We've searched the summer through, Finn. We've searched the summer through, Finn, and through the fall. The men have to think of their winter quarters now, and of their families. Their families, Finn cut in outrage. Is that what they're thinking of? Their warmth, their comfort? Cowlight stepped closer, his voice dropping to become hard and tense and scolding. Now you listen to me, Finn Macumhall. What you've said is unfair, and you know it as well as I. It's a long, hard way we've come with you, searching across the most rugged and barren parts of Ireland. They've gone without food and even drink sometimes. They've gone without rest or even a warming fire to follow this mad quest, on, and they never a complaint, have you heard? This argument had no effect on Finn, other than to fuel his rage. How dare you talk to me that way, he said. It's fionn men you're speaking of, no labor is too much. It's only their loyalty to me they should be thinking of. Anyway, that's where I stop. Page 106. Take a break. Turn that off. Thank you for the like. Easy on the way. Easy on the way. Oh, and him crowing in the background, said overhead. It's easy on the way.